Every story needs a villain, but this one was necessary. 30 pieces of silver, a kiss in the dark, a name that became a curse for 2,000 years. Judas. But here is the uncomfortable question. If Judas had not betrayed Jesus, would Christianity even exist? First century Judea, Roman occupation, political tension, messianic expectations rising. Jesus of Nazareth gathers 12 disciples, among them Judas Iscariot. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Judas agrees to hand Jesus over to the authorities. The arrest leads to the trial leads to the crucifixion leads to the resurrection. I'm Alex, and today we're not here to defend Judas, we're here to examine the role he played, because when you slow the story down, it becomes far less stable than it seems. In Matthew 26, Judas negotiates with the chief priests. The price is set, 30 pieces of silver. In Mark, the earliest gospel, written around 70 of the current era, his motive is barely explained. In Luke, we are told that Satan entered into Judas. In John, Jesus himself tells him, "What you're going to do quickly." Greed, demonic influence, divine orchestration. Even his surname is uncertain. Iscariot may refer to the town of Kerioth in Judea, or it may echo the Latin Sicarius, a dagger man, an assassin linked to radical Jewish rebels. From the beginning, Judas stands at the crossroads of ambiguity, and ambiguity is dangerous in a foundational story. The familiar version feels clear. Judas betrays Jesus for money. He identifies him with a kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane. Roman soldiers arrest Jesus. The machinery of execution begins, but even the ending fractures. In Matthew 27, Judas feels remorse. He returns the silver to the priests. He confesses, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." Then he hangs himself. In Acts 1, written by the same author as Luke, the story changes. Judas acquires a field with the reward of his betrayal. He falls headlong. His body bursts open, his intestines spill out. 2 deaths, 2 memories. The field becomes known as Akeldama, the field of blood. Even the 30 pieces of silver are loaded with meaning. In the book of Zechariah, written centuries before Christ, 30 pieces of silver are thrown into the house of the Lord as the wages of a rejected shepherd. Matthew explicitly links Judas to that prophecy, which means something important. The story of Judas is not merely recalled, it is shaped to fit Scripture, and Scripture shapes villains. Step back from theology for a moment. Western civilization inherits 2 powerful traditions, Hebrew sacrificial law and Roman judicial procedure. In Leviticus, sin requires atonement. On the Day of Atonement, a scapegoat symbolically carries the sins of the people into the wilderness. In Roman law, crime demands a responsible agent. Order depends on naming the guilty. No rupture without a culprit, no restoration without a price. By the 1st century, these ideas saturate the Mediterranean world. Now consider the Christian proclamation. The crucifixion redeems humanity. If the crucifixion is salvific, then it must happen. Without arrest, no trial. Without trial, no crucifixion. Without crucifixion, no resurrection. The system requires rupture, but once rupture happens, responsibility must be localized. Rome cannot carry all the blame. The theological narrative cannot condemn the entire crowd. The logic of justice demands a face. Judas becomes that face. He concentrates guilt. He simplifies complexity. He allows redemption to unfold while preserving moral order. Betrayal, in this framework, is not accidental. It is structurally necessary. Now the instability deepens. The 4 canonical Gospels were written between roughly 70 and 100 of the current era, decades after the events they describe. Mark offers no clear motive. Matthew emphasizes money. Luke introduces cosmic conflict. John presents Judas as keeper of the common purse and calls him a thief. Responsibility shifts from greed to destiny to spiritual invasion. Then, in the 2nd century, alternative voices emerge. Around 180 of the current era, the Bishop Irenaeus of Lyon denounces a group he considers heretical. Among their texts is something extraordinary, the Gospel of Judas. This text, rediscovered in Egypt and published in 2006 from a manuscript known as the Codex Tachakos, portrays Judas not as villain, but as the only disciple who truly understands Jesus. In this version, Jesus asks Judas to hand him over. The betrayal becomes obedience. The death of the body becomes liberation of the divine. Suddenly the moral architecture shifts. If Judas acts knowingly within divine intention, then his guilt becomes ambiguous, and ambiguity is intolerable for a stabilizing religion. In the 4th century, everything changes. Under Emperor Constantine the Great, Christianity moves from persecuted sect to imperial religion. The Council of Nicaea in 325 of the current era defines doctrine. Orthodoxy hardens. Institutions now depend on clarity. A morally complex Judas threatens that clarity. An obedient Judas destabilizes the hierarchy of sin. So the canonical image solidifies. Traitor, greedy, despairing, irredeemable. Alternative interpretations fade from power. The Gospel of Judas survives only in fragments, outside the mainstream tradition. History makes a choice, and once that choice is institutionalized, it becomes difficult to reverse, because stable systems prefer stable villains. By the Middle Ages, Judas is no longer simply a disciple, he is the archetype of betrayal. In the early 14th century, Dante Alighieri places Judas in the lowest circle of hell in the Inferno. Satan devours him eternally. Betrayal of one's benefactor is the ultimate crime. In medieval Passion plays across Europe, Judas is staged as grotesque, greedy, often visually exaggerated. His character blends with negative stereotypes about Jewish communities. The theological narrative spills into social reality. In some regions, Holy Week performances were followed by hostility or violence against Jews, fueled by the dramatized memory of betrayal. Judas becomes more than a character, he becomes a cultural symbol, a warning, a projection, a container for collective fear of treachery. Once a symbol takes root, it transcends its origin. It can be invoked in politics, in literature, in accusation. To call someone a Judas becomes shorthand for ultimate disloyalty. The man dissolves, the function remains. Why does this figure endure so powerfully? Because he fits something older and deeper than Christianity. Western societies have long organized justice around identifiable responsibility. In ancient Athens, during times of crisis, ritual scapegoats could be expelled to restore civic harmony. In Rome, public punishment reinforced order by naming and displaying guilt. In medieval Europe, heresy trials isolated deviants in a single body. In modern courts, even when systems fail collectively, we search for individuals to prosecute. Disorder must be traced. Chaos must be personalized. Judas becomes the archetype of necessary guilt. The crucifixion is presented as divinely ordained, yet someone must be accountable. He carries the tension between destiny and freedom, between divine plan and human choice, and that tension has never disappeared. Every era produces its own version of Judas, not always guilty, but always necessary.
Judas became more than a man. He became a role, the hinge of salvation, the face of betrayal, the embodiment of guilt. From 1st century Judea to imperial councils to Dante's hell to medieval theater to modern language, history kept him frozen. Because every system eventually creates a role no one wants to play. The traitor, the scapegoat, the necessary villain. The question is no longer whether Judas betrayed, the question is why history needed him to, and who plays that role today.
Stay curious.